Good morning, good afternoon, good evening across the world. Here we're having our affiliate session of the World Economic Forum's 2021 Sustainable Development Impact Summit on circular economy solutions for net zero through digital innovations. And this session is hosted by the Luohan Academy. I am Wei Liu, a senior scientist here in the Academy. I'm also on the Science Committee of the United Nations World Adaptation Science Program, focusing on climate adaptation. And today we have a panel, a very diverse panel of four great thinkers from around the world. And Professor Long Chen, the president of the Luohan Academy, and Dr. Isabella Teixeira, former Minister of Brazil, Minister of Environment in Brazil, and the current co-chair of the International Resource Panel at the UN Environment. And we also have Peter Lacey from Accenture, a guru and pioneer in the field of circular economy globally. And also Dave Brzezinski from the Environment Law Institute, and also the former director of Science, Technology, and Innovation at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And great to meet you, our distinguished panelists. So in this session, we will have two parts. In the first part, we'll have each of you give a short introduction about your experience and your thoughts on our topic, circular economy and digital revolutions for net zero, which we are facing this daunting challenge to turn the whole world around in 30 years to reach net zero. And circular economy has been given a lot of hope for more than a decade. But apparently we're far from reaching exploiting all the potential of circular economy. Taking an example as, for example, we have only 9%, maybe even less, recycling for global plastics. And we definitely, the current way is not working. And in the meantime, we have a world that is going even more and more digitalized, especially in the post-COVID world. And this definitely brings us a lot of opportunities. So we would like each of you to give us some updates on your most recent thoughts and ideas and practices where you have seen and in this field. And we'll start with Dr. Peter Lacey from Accenture. You have led the work, a lot of pioneering work with your books and reports, including some of those with the World Economic Forum on the on circular economy. And you have estimated the size of the circular economy and why it's something that will make profit. And can you elaborate with us on how you see digitalization, a few years after your initial studies, is helping us through this direction? And what are some of the challenges and what might be some of the major solutions that we should be looking at?
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Wei Liu, and thank you very much to the Luohan Academy for hosting this along with the World Economic Forum. I'm delighted that you would make the effort, given that it's the Autumn Lunar Festival and you should all be celebrating with your families. I had one of the best 3 years of my life living in Shanghai in China, running our Asia Pacific business. And you'll be pleased to know last night I was literally celebrating the Chinese Moon Festival with my family. So I'm sure that's the reason everyone's not up at this stage. They've had a couple of Mao Tais, and that's why they're not with us today. But listen, on a serious note, we face unprecedented challenges globally. Isabella played an important role in Paris and climate change and the Paris Accord, but I think we would all agree that while carbon and climate change are perhaps the greatest challenge that we need to tackle globally, they come alongside so many other challenges along biodiversity and nature, water, material usage, the extinction that we're seeing of rates that are unprecedented, deforestation, ocean acidification, right across the board. And one of the, I think, important things about the circular economy is that it is not a panacea. It is not a replacement for the Sustainable Development Goals, but it is a very important way of thinking about an economic concept that allows us to decouple the things we want versus the things we don't want from our economy and economic activity. So we do want economic development, we do want poverty reduction, we do want jobs, we do want the right kinds of growth. We don't want the scarce and harmful use of natural resources. And it's very important to make that point. It's not against the use of natural resources, the circular economy concept. It is against the use of scarce or harmful natural resources. And I would include carbon within that context. And that, I think, is a very important innovation concept at the macro level for policymakers who are defining the boundaries of how markets should work, but also becomes an incredibly powerful innovation concept for companies thinking about how to design their products, their services, their business models, their operations, their supply chains to deliver that end value to consumers and customers without those scarce and harmful use of natural resources. And when you put it like that, it becomes one of the most powerful innovation concepts available to businesses to think about what their future strategies should be, what their future business models and their future operations should look like. To your point very specifically, Liu, when we started to map this out systematically in our first book, Waste to Wealth, and we looked at 100 different companies that were able to achieve traditional high performance in terms of business metrics, shareholder value, accounting-based value, while starting to show signs, either at the business unit level or at their corporate enterprise level, of being able to show quantifiable circular economy benefits. We modeled both at the macro and the micro level using Oxford Economics and various other external bodies and making sure that we had our economics right. We modeled at a reasonably conservative scenario to 2030 that there was a $4.5 trillion opportunity for the companies that were able to decouple that value to the customer or consumer from the use of scarce and harmful natural resources. You mentioned plastics, but also the full gamut, energy, water, waste, materials, right through the economy and right through different value chains, from automotive to fast-moving consumer goods, from industrial through to consumer electronics. Now, 6 years on, we published the Circular Economy Handbook. If you like, if the first book was about setting out strategies for business, the second book was much more about how to go after that opportunity in terms of customer propositions, business models, 5 business models that we look at, 23 enabling technologies. We looked at more than 200 different technologies because it's important to note that one of the reasons things are possible in circular economy now that haven't been before is because of the incredible breakthroughs in science and engineering across physical, biological, and digital technologies. WEF call it the fourth industrial revolution, call it what you like. We're seeing the pace of science and engineering allowing us to do things that have not been possible before, and allowing the shift from products to services, to elongating the use phases of products, to switching out non-renewable, non-biodegradable materials for renewable and biodegradable materials. 5-6 years on, we believe that $4.5 trillion still holds. We've re-examined it. I think, if anything, it is a conservative estimate. The reason it's a conservative estimate for business and for governments that get this right, or regions and cities, is because it assumes no additional price signals from tax or cap and trade or regulation. We decided not to do that deliberately to demonstrate that you could make money out of these strategies without relying on policymakers or regulators. If we get the kinds of price signal regulation and policy I hope that we start to see coming off of the back of COP and some of the biodiversity work and nature work that's being done and that's urgently needed, you could see that number grow actually by orders of magnitude, that $4.5 trillion, by the time we get to 2030. Unfortunately, here's a really unfortunate reality, and I'll finish with that unfortunate reality, is that we are not making progress at the net level globally. If you believe the circular economy overall ratings from the circular economy think tank in the Netherlands, we're still flat at the macro level in terms of the progress being made. I find that extraordinarily frustrating because the technology, the business models, and the ability to actually achieve the circular economy are there. We don't need new inventions, although they can be helpful. We have the science, we have the engineering, we have the capital. So we need to think very carefully how we scale at speed because we can, and absolutely we need to, both for our generation and future generations.
Thank you, Peter. I guess the message was very promising because it's more than 4.5 trillion. There's a lot of reasons for that to happen, but the reality is that we're still extremely far from it. So that actually is something that our second panelist, Professor Long Chen, can probably give some hints from the experience in China and in other places. Because as you mentioned, the reason, one key factor is the market penetration. With all those technologies, those ideas, and capitals, how can we get there? So the market share of these different kind of business models is quite limited. So what might be some of the key innovations that digital platforms, which is a new form of economy, can bring to boost the adoption of the circular economy business models? What are maybe some of the barriers? And this is Professor Long Chen can give us some hints.
Oh, yes. Yes. So it's already 1 a.m. in China, but I think the topic is important enough that it's worthy to lose some sleep. And I am so grateful to have the opportunity to talk with this panel of great guests. Now, I think more and more people realize that the importance of net zero growth, but probably perhaps not enough to realize how hard it is to achieve that purpose. If we think about it, the industrial revolutions are powered by energy revolutions. It is only after the use of the fossil energy that led to mass production of steel, the machine age started. So in a similar way, the net zero growth is an unprecedented challenge in modern economic history. So, and especially so for the emerging markets, where manufacturing and modernization are rising. So it is like this, keep running while replacing your blood. Now, and I completely agree that the circular economy is extremely important concept. Essence is to reduce the resource and raw materials and increase recycling. But the challenge is to do so in a scalable, all stakeholder participating way, and can do so without the reliance on government support, but powered by technology and perhaps some mechanism design. So today I would like to focus a little bit on the relation between the circular economy and the digital platform. Now, thus far as we probably realize, there are a couple of approaches to progress the circular economy. One approach is the top-down approach. It is initiated by the government and coupled with the carbon market. Now, but thus far, as Peter just mentioned, it's not being penetrating enough. Now, and we believe as we practice in China and probably in many areas in the world, we see that there's another bottom-up approach. It is a market-based approach that better connects consumers to the producers. It is scalable, it's powered by technology, and it does not rely on the government support. But it requires both technology and smart business designs in the marketplace. So here we can see that the digital platform can play a critical role in this regard. But let me give you a couple of examples to maybe can help us to open up our discussions. One example is it's a digital platform. It's called Idlefish in China. Now, in comparison, we know there's a platform called Craigslist in the United States. Now, in the United States, about 1% of the population that buys and sell used products. If we come in comparison for Craigslist, even by 2 years ago, the registered buyers, users, has exceeded 300 million people. And so every day there are more than 23 million active buyers. They are on the platform buying the used secondhand goods. Now, so on average, and almost registered 100 million sellers. And on average, every day, 2 million products are released and 1 million are traded. So it's an extremely active secondhand market. Think about clothes. So every clothes, if you only need to produce it once, probably it will be woven by 3 people. So that's probably a good example of the circular economy of Peter described. And so there's a separation of the production and consumption. So we have different consumption style, and especially we find that on the idle fish, that young people love it because they actually they love this concept. Also, they would like to buy something that's not that expensive, and it's kind of green, and it's actually fashionable. So they love it, and so it's pretty interesting. Now, but the key here I'd like to introduce is how do we make this work? Because in the secondhand markets, actually every single piece of goods is not standardized. It's unique. So, and you need to have a trust system. You need to identify the goods. Now, then that's why you need the digital technology. So to make this work, Idlefish provide a sequence of the mechanisms powered by technology, including, for example, the social system, firstly. And so the users, they generate contents and provides the commodities online. Now we have the intermediaries, introduced intermediaries. It has the professional appraisers and insurance companies to make this work. It has the credit systems to make that the buyers and sellers, they have some kind of the credit scores, to screen them, to make them have some basic trust systems start with. It has the legal systems. It has the decentralized the small courts, to govern is in case there's a dispute. And finally, it connects to the e-commerce platforms. So if for anybody who bought the pieces, if they want to resell them on the secondhand market, it's easy. So for all those things, they're powered by this digital technology that has led to the scalability. You have the more than 300 million people who can do it on that, and I would call this economy because there's so many participants. Now, another example I'll give you is something called Armed Forest, and I have a personal experience with that because the idea was born in my office back in 2016. So back then we decided to do something about green. We were at that time, I was the chief strategy officer on financial. So we'd like to do something to not only inclusive finance, but maybe green finance. But we're thinking, how can we get people involved? We decided to actually, maybe we can use the digital technology and big data to track people's upon the approval, to track people's carbon footage. So for the carbon reduction, let's say Peter decides today that you want to be a better person. You like to, rather than driving a car, you decide to take a subway to work. So that leads to a certain carbon reduction. And that can be calculated, measured, translated into little green balls and in Alipay. And so if the users collect those green balls, a virtual tree will grow from seeds to grow into a full virtual tree. And at that time, a real tree will be planted in the deserted areas where trees are needed. So that we release that little products. And we also have the gamification. So people can steal each other's friends, can steal each other's green energy. So it becomes a game. Anyway, so it's very little cost for them to participate. It's fun. And there is very little sense of the environmental inclination. So a lot of people participated. So within 6 months, it becomes one of the most successful app in China. So after several years, now it's still one of the most successful one. Now it has more than 600 million users agreed to participate, and so that what that really says is that so essentially you have several percent of the world's population every day that actively they watch their green behavior. In the meantime, they're actually planting trees. So more than 326 million trees have been planted in 11 provinces in the past 5 years, and so that's the second example. So let me summarize. Now, besides the government-led top-down approach, the regulation with the carbon markets, and which it's important, it's essential, but it has limited success. It doesn't describe the whole economy, because if you want to have an economy, you want to have all the stakeholders participate. So then we believe there's another way, that is that to complement the top-down approach, which is the bottom-up, market-driven, powered by technology approach to the circular economy, and it doesn't rely on the government's support, but it requires the digital technology and the smart mechanism design. And in that regard, digital platforms properly aimed and designed can be a good place for promoting digital net zero transformation. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Professor Chen. I guess we have also some good news here. And the third panelist is Dave Rajewski. Dave, you had been studying a range of emerging technologies in depth for decades, from material technology to biotechnology and to digital technology recently. And Peter says that, we've got other technologies. I wonder whether you agree with that, because whether we still have, whether when fusing some of these technologies can still give us some margin on additional kind of benefits in boosting circular economy and to transition in net zero. And also your recent project to really assess how digital economy impact the environment, because you had actually one article from more than 20 years ago, first look at e-commerce's environmental impacts. And now you're doing this comprehensive study, really looking at both the direct and indirect effects of digitalization. Can you give us some ideas on what are the main lessons or that you have learned from recently, and what are some of the next steps?
Sure. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. I actually I can talk a little bit about the sort of the convergence of bio info and nano. But let me start with that article, because I actually forced myself to go back and read it, which is always painful, right? When you write something that's now 20 years old, it was 1999, and go back and reading it is sort of like, okay, did I get anything right? So this was, I think, one of the first articles on e-commerce and the environment. And at that point in time, the BlackBerry had just been introduced. The first wiki went up. I mean, we have to kind of take ourselves back. Only 7% of the people in the US had actually bought anything online at that point. Amazon existed. It wasn't turning a profit. And it was focused largely in the book area. But my argument then was to say, okay, what happens if this continues and we reach a point in history where essentially human consumption becomes frictionless, right? So that I reach a point where I can buy anything I want at any point in time, and there's no boundaries, and and I realized this would be a really hard problem to solve, to even think about, because the e-commerce system then, it was a tightly coupled complex system, right? It's what Brian Arthur calls a technological ecology. Some people call it a socio-technical system. So it can't be, I can give this phone to my engineering friends, and they'll tell me how many kilograms of carbon are produced when I use it. But what happens essentially when I put it in my hand, right? And I think that became, for me, the really large question, that you really needed multiple disciplines to solve this problem. You needed a lot of money. This was not going to be solved easily, right, to really figure this out. And so I basically I convinced nobody with this article. It was one of my great failures. So I have to admit that, people, I said, we got to focus on this. I said, what are you, crazy? Nobody's buying anything online. This is going to go nowhere. And I wrote another one in 2002 that failed. And so I just stopped. I went into working on nanotechnology, and when we met at IAS, I was doing synthetic biology. But I always was kind of interested in this because I think that in the meantime, digitalization has become kind of this mantra that is going to solve a lot of these problems, right? And I returned to this about 5 years ago. I actually had a workshop on the sharing economy. And at that workshop, I found somebody who actually was one of the first people I know that actually did a calculation on the impact of Craigslist in the United States. And interestingly enough, found out that the use of Craigslist in 2 or 3 states actually had more impact than the entire recycling program in California. So I started to bring these people together, and one of the things I found is they'd never met each other. These were people, there was an ecologist there, which you are, right? I had an operations research person, a transportation research person, a lawyer. And so I think one of the things that I saw even after 15, 20 years, but this was just an under-researched area. Everybody was talking about it, but we didn't have a lot of research. And people were interested in what happens about Airbnb. Does it induce more travel? I've got a new project I'm funding on what happens when we actually buy things online and we return them, right? Which has actually become the business model of a lot of e-commerce companies. We'll send you a whole bunch of things, try them on and send them back. So we don't tend to think about, okay, what's the carbon footprint of reverse logistics? So I think one of the main things that came out of a lot of this research, and we've talked to researchers and we funded researchers, is the one thing that we don't get right is we don't know how to set system boundaries. And I can set the system boundaries to make almost any techno system look good, right? And I think that's one of the main lessons. The other thing that's been very difficult is getting the data. A lot of the data that we need is actually is owned by people like you guys, right? The e-commerce companies or the Airbnbs of the world. And so I think there's an enormous opportunity, and it's not easy to do. You saw what happened. Facebook just shut down their data feed to New York University, right? They don't want to give any more data to researchers. But I think if there's some way that we can figure out how to take this data, disaggregate it, or aggregate it up and protect privacy, put it in data vaults and give it to researchers, enormous impact might happen. I've been involved tangentially with the circular economy. Most of my time has been spent with the precursor to this, which was called industrial ecology, right? Before the circular economy happened and MacArthur, everybody sort of pumped this thing up, there still is this field of industrial ecology, which says we can actually begin to shape the way we design industrial systems so that they behave like ecological systems. So less taken waste, less linear systems. Essentially, a lot of the thoughts that went into circular economy thinking were there before. So I think the issue is, and we've been funding projects, I think the issue is there's not enough money here, right? And so I have money from the Sloan Foundation, I have money from the Internet Society, I'm putting in a proposal to the National Science Foundation. We need just lots more research. And we need research that tells us something not only about these devices, right? But we need some research about what happens when people use them, right? So, we know that the ICT sector probably uses 3.5 to 7% of global energy, maybe 1.5 to 3% of the carbon emissions. So it's probably bigger than aviation, but smaller than petrochemicals. But that's just the direct energy use from the infrastructure. That tells us nothing about sort of what happens if we save time and energy and money by using these and we engage in energy intensive activities, the rebound effects. What happens when we start using autonomous vehicles? What impacts does that have on logistics systems or the way we design cities, right? So all of these secondary and tertiary effects. We just put out a request for proposals today that focuses on indirect effects, right? And that's something that needs a lot more, I think, attention. Let me stop there. This whole issue that Peter brought up about this need for converging technology solutions between the bio. When you and I met, I think I had just given a talk in Austria on sort of the new bioeconomy. Everybody was focused on Web 4.0. I forgot what number it was, and I was talking about, well, what happens when we can actually edit genes? And I remember people. That's how I ended up at IASA. People thought that was kind of interesting, and it was something that we needed to do, is to think about this intersection of the physical world, the biological world, and the material world. Because in the end, we're not going to live inside bits. We need atoms. So in the end, I'm worried about how we're going to produce steel. I'm worried about how we're going to produce concrete. And we can maybe digitize some of this or make it more efficient. And we've done some studies on the use of AI to improve the efficiency of chemical synthesis processes. But I think it's going to take, that's probably where I'll end. There's a saying by Bill McGibbon that we're running out of options, we're running out of decades. So we need decades. We need to be thinking about decades, right? And what can we do in the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? And how do we actually set up the policy infrastructure, the science and tech infrastructure to actually get the things out there, not only increase the efficiency of what's there dramatically, if it can be increased, but also kind of come up with the next sort of steps and the next set of disruptive technologies and get them to market and scale them, right? I think that's going to be one of the huge kinds of challenges. A friend of mine once said the computer science people tend to think 1, 2, 3, a million, right? And they forget what's between 3 and a million. And that's all of the effort it takes to actually take something to scale and penetrate the market and get people to use it. And I think that's filling that gap is going to take a lot of bright people. Maybe we can start putting the network together here. So I'll stop.
Great, Dave. What you just mentioned is from 3 to a million is exactly what Isabella was mentioning earlier of how we're going to achieve this for the global population, instead of just a small part of the world. And because the reality is that the majority of the world population still face major economic challenges, especially in the pandemic area, unemployment, inequalities, low infrastructure, for realizing some of the potentials. So Isabella, especially from a policymaker's perspective, which, you had a lot of experience with, what would be a viable pathways, just if we can have for this digital and circular future of net zero world, especially for the emerging economies in this post-pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic world?
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Liu. First of all, I'm very honored to have the opportunity to join you today and other friends. I was here really paying attention to all the arguments that my dear friends share. And of course, as a policymaker, I used to think based on politics, what is coming, what is changing, and how we need to combine the worlds, if I can use this expression, between the codes, because we have different roads, different realities. Is the same in the politics, okay? So when we achieved and we agreed to have Paris Agreement, we changed. I remember this because it was Brazil who the countries that took decision to change, the first took decision to agree with a new global agreement. So, and it was based on the private political dialogue, bilateral political dialogue with China. Okay, it's fascinating to us exactly consider the emerging economy perspectives and the new economies that are coming, like circularity, green economies, the challenge that emerging economies face. But more than this, how we can understand better to use nature and the natural resource assets in a positive way, considering climate change crisis, but also biodiversity loss. I remember very well that motivated by climate change, but also together with the biodiversity crisis or nature crisis, as we used to highlight today. So I'd like to share here 2 or 3 points, because I fully agree all the arguments that my friends share. I understand that need scale, it's crucial. But if you allow me, I will highlight the last point that Professor Dave shared with us, exactly that we need to go into decades. And this is very important because we need to try to connect the political timing that we have around the world. Climate change will come to race to zero, even that you don't have all the common understanding what it means politically, economically, and geopolitically. Everyone understands that to have this long-term perspective or long-term ambition, net zero by 2050 or 2060, you have this range. But of course, it's 2050. But it's not clear what are the strategies, how the long-term planning that the countries need to promote and need to put in practice, how indeed we connect things, how indeed we have some shortcuts, how indeed we address short-term perspective solutions. Because when you go into developing economies or emerging economies, you will have huge challenges for economic and social development, and you need to promote answers, concrete answers in short-term perspectives. So my feeling is that here you have something very important for circular economy, because circular economy should help the countries to not only to influence or be part of that zero planning, as you know, that you can reduce resource efficiency, international resource planning, other scientific bodies shows to us that you can cut around 6% of the greenhouse emissions. You can go into 9% of biodiversity law, water stress, etc., etc. But what concretely, we need to use this to go into the national realities to influence the net zero planning, but also to understand what are the key political economic alliances that should come together to make this faster. And this why? Because we need to understand two things: the role of the private sectors and business sectors and financial sector, as mentioned before, and also markets, and how these players will influence the innovation plans considered the countries around the world. And this is something very sensitive, because not necessarily, I know that China has this, but not necessarily around the world considered developing economies, you have innovation plans together with climate or green planning, or even development plans bring as green innovation as a building block of this national strategy. Not necessarily these things are connected. And this is very important to observe, because in the past, until recently, we used to manage these issues as silos: environmental pillar, climate, etc. And now climate is bringing everything, we're looking forward to bring everything together. And this is, in my opinion, a huge opportunity for circular economy, because circular economy plays as a bridge. And if you can connect agendas, if you can use this better, and innovation will make it faster than it is today, wow, we can have really a huge opportunity to make clear for everyone, for policymakers, how natural resource efficiency, allow circularity, everything that you mentioned, my friends here mentioned before, how it makes sense to take decision today. So it's not only 2030, 2040, 2050, but we need to understand what the impact the climate crisis will provoke, consider the planning, the national interest, and the strategy that will emerge. And we need to bring circular economy into this context, because it's easier to manage something that everyone understands what it means, independent of the gaps of knowledge, scientific knowledge that we have. But natural resource used to be in materials, they are touchable. Carbon is not touchable. Biodiversity is landscape, but it's touchable. Everyone understands when I say what is scarcity means, what soil degradation means, what mining sector means. And also you can bring something very important. I think that Peter mentioned this, the role of job generation and how you can use this in concrete measures to make sense that we are looking for to have a new future, not based on a linear process as in the past, but understand how circularity will bring everyone together. My second point here, so it's absolutely important to understand the role of green innovation, consider green development, or in green development, consider the national development strategies. And this is also something that sometimes is not clear. And I think that, again, when you go into plastics, for example, industrial or chemical industry, we need to understand how we can use this to go into the sustainable consumption, production, behavior, and also to allow, in a country like Brazil, for example, the debate today is how we can use circular economy to influence the fiscal reform in such a way that we can use fiscal tools to address better solutions based on circular economy. So we need to understand how we go into these different silos that to have different constituents, and how, again, politically and economically, circular economy will make sense for these players. It's not only us that should make sense, but the other ones that we understand that this is more than opportunity, and also make clear politically who will be the losers. We have winners on one side of the coin, but we have the losers on the other side of the coin. And it is very important to make clear what should stay behind or must stay behind. And this is something also, in my opinion, that circular economy is very useful politically, because allows to understand how we promote transitions, how indeed we structure, build transition, and understand better since from industrial sector, from transportation, design, fashion industry, different aspects, nature, agriculture, stand-up forest economy, everyone, we can go into there and manage really concrete realities to promote robust solution. And more than this, as mentioned here before, decouple. And decoupling is a really powerful tool to make people understand that circular economy is an asset for the 21st century and not something so only for developed economy or something untouchable. My third point here, this century you have two ages, and this is very important to understand. First one for climate and another one innovations. You have these two ages coming together. And one of the critical points that I used to have in developing economies is exactly to ask for what is the citizenship that we measure? What are my rights? Consider social inequalities and my low quality of life that I have. How we go into concrete problems like poverty eradication and use circular economy as an asset to stimulate, to facilitate local solutions and regional solutions, and to promote inclusive development. This is something, it's not words. This means that's a political message that you have flexibility, if I can use the expression, consider circular economy, to go into different layers and to share technology and innovations in different layers of the society. See, from agriculture, for example, when you go into hunger eradication and food production, and you address low carbon economy together with nature positive agriculture, together with circularity and water protection, to, for example, transportation or aviation or new building, how you can face the gaps of housing in developing economies based on circular economy. This is fascinating because it's based on concrete solutions that have scale. And also that makes sense for private and business sector and also financial sector. So again, it's a new role. It's a role that innovations connect things, innovation puts things together. And as I think that Professor Davis shows to us, when they managed the device, the mobile phone, this changed our lives, okay? And we continue to change our lives. I'm sorry, but it's true. So how we can use the data, the information did to make sense that my choice will influence not only a better life for me today, but also for other players, for other communities that I understand that should come together. And this is something, my last comment, consider the international challenge. We cannot forget internationally that the world is changing, that we have this global crisis, as mentioned before by Peter, the global environmental crisis. Global environmental crisis means that we need global solutions, yes, but you need to understand global impacts and national and local impacts. And now we emerge the new agenda that will come, new perspectives, the global commons. What is the role of circular economy to decouple this complexity of geopolitical arrangements that will manage these global crisis issues and come this into their national individual realities to make sense that act in a new direction makes sense, more than makes sense. It's important to take decisions in this direction. Why? Because political players used to play based on national realities. Okay, it's not on international realities. For developing economy, okay, in short-term perspective, if you want to know what is the role of circular economy to improve quality of life in Amazon region in Brazil in the next 10 years, okay, I need to understand that to have 8% of Brazil or Amazon people that live in Brazilian Amazon living in cities. So it's not only the stand-up forests that I need to manage. I need to go into cities and understand, for example, the role of circular economy for transportation models in that region. That's so important for climate stability. It's exactly this process that makes sure, in my opinion, then based on my experience, that we can go into this new international order that is not only north and south. Okay, you have now West and Western coming together. And this is very important to observe, okay, because we need to understand how we can use these different concepts and approaches and opportunities of circular economy to bring people together, to understand the challenges of global companies that in the Eastern world, not necessarily the same challenge in the Western world. And we cannot forget how innovation should or must impact international trade, considering circular economy as an asset. This is absolutely the real world that we're going into this real world to address climate change targets, for example, Paris Agreement, but more than this, Race to Zero probably will host some pathways that will connect these worlds. That's why we're discussing today the emergence of carbon clubs with different countries. Okay, this is based on what? On natural resource and raise ambition and biodiversity protection, water protection, migration. What are the issues that we should bring together to understand the impacts in our societies and also the resilience that must be built and the role of circular economy to connect and to make sure that we are in the right directions. My feeling is that circular economy will have in the next 10 years, this decade, a strategic political role to show that we can act based on solutions considering scale, but also a big challenge for financial sector, international financial sector, not only to finance, but to minimize risks and vulnerabilities of the international financial systems that today exposed for climate change. So people will not support to manage all the time under pressure of vulnerabilities and risks. We need to give really something based that you can choose, and you need to give, based on science, how we can move forward, consider the future, but more than this, as part of the solution and connecting different realities and it makes sense based on different realities. So my feeling is that these next 10 years will be critical for circular economy to come on board and model this, to experiment a new way or to express a new way of leadership, global leadership based on change and new choice and not based on the past. Thank you, Professor Liu.
Thank you, Isabella. I think you made a great point here that circular economy, but actually I think I read a paper that there are probably more than 140 different definitions of it, but yes, it is a great bridging concept that really brings people together. People, from different fields, different countries, they find common grounds. They all like this concept that makes a great place to link to each other. And as you mentioned, we will not achieve net zero alone. It has to be achieved together with other goals, biodiversity goals, poverty goals. So it's also a social economic movement. As Professor Chen mentioned, this has to be a whole economy solution, not just the top down, but also bottom up. And also, as Peter and Dave mentioned, a systemic system solution. So this is, and then, we do believe that in this process, with digitalization, it definitely can help facilitate this technical and social transition processes, and hopefully in a decade that is coming. So, as we enter into the second phase of this hour, understand Isabella probably will have to leave a bit early. We would like that because you have listened to each other. We'll be happy if you may have a question to each other. But we have prepared two overarching kind of questions. And one is, how do we? I mean, I will change it a little bit. How do we better connect local to global and global back to local? These kind of interactions, and to scale, the successes across the complex and interconnected global value chains. Because circular economy is about connections, making new and necessary connections. And in this process, because it's a long way to go, as Dave mentioned, from 3 to 1 million, then what are some of the no regret or low regret solutions that we should prioritize? We should start right away.
So, well, is your question what needs to be in place right away? So, I mean, as in anything, just because we've only got a few minutes. So, I mean, my view of the biggest thing is probably going to be the hardest thing, which is really the economics of externalities and increasingly pricing the real cost. To Dave's point about systems and technology systems, and Isabella's point about policymakers, the more that we can price the real costs of some of the broader consequences of resource use, that would be huge, but it's very, very difficult to do. So with that, I would say there are a lot of I would say that there are some very, very promising technologies out there and very promising business models. We talk in the book, not particularly promoting that. There are others who cover this, everything from Ellen MacArthur Foundation to World Resources Institute to World Economic Forum, and with the UNEP's International Resource Panel, there's lots of places people can go. What I would say is every single business that I have ever served on this topic, which at Accenture is hundreds of boards and CEOs over the last decade, I have never come across a business where one of the 5 business models enabled by some of these new technologies was not a profitable, growing business and way of rethinking their business model, their operations, their supply chain, or as Long Chen mentioned, coming up with totally new marketplaces, for recovered, recycled, reused, remarketed, product life extension products and so on. So I guess my critical message is every single business I have ever come across can become a circular economy business with enough innovative thinking and vision and application of some of those different resources to their existing and future business models, and with enough creativity about rethinking their technology base. So I guess that's, if you like, it's a leadership mindset that every business should be thinking about.
Yeah, I'll talk about something that nobody really wants to talk about, but I will put it out, and that's basic research, right? So we've been stunned with the vaccines, right? Warp speed, right? So there's a Hungarian biochemist who started thinking about how to take RNA and get it past our immune system in 1979. It took her 10 years to get her first grant from the National Institutes of Health. So we're backing up 40 or 50 years now. And all of a sudden we have in place, because of a bunch of strategic investments by NIH, which funds basic research, the ability to do this. But she could not deliver it into our cells. In order to do that, she had to use something called lipid nanoparticles. So that was completely dependent on other investments that countries made. There were, I think, 25 countries that had national nanotech initiatives for decades, right? So I think nobody covers this. It's not sexy, but when you look at these innovations, you always back up decades, right? Before we started fracking the earth here, there was 20 years of research by the Department of Energy. DOD sent the first GPS satellite up in 1969. NASA used the first photovoltaic cells in 1955, right? So there's this lead time, and I think when we think about, okay, I think that the new International Energy Agency report lists 400 different things that we can do to get to carbon neutrality. And they basically say for the first 10 or so years, we can use what is existing. But then after that, we're going to need game-changing technologies. That means that we have to start thinking about what investments do we make now, and the people, the policymakers that are focused on sort of the basic research and the near applied research, what do they have to do to position, the technologies that we're going to need in, let's say, 2035, right? 2040. So, and there's a huge, I think, science policy and science and technology infrastructure piece here that tends to get ignored because I say people just don't, they see the innovation pop out and they forget about everything that happened before.
No, and Dave, can I just support that point just before we close? Look, so I think your point about Facebook closing, I'm not going to make specific criticism, but I think those 2 points that we need to fundamentally have a Manhattan Project like view of fundamental research and basic research to tackle the SDGs and climate, and that also that the commercial R&D team should not be sat on data that could be used and developed and innovated in the public space and with academics, because we don't have the time. The speed and the scale of the human challenge that's required. Of course, we can find ways to still create competitive advantage for firms. There's always ways of being creative. But the idea that some of the data that could be solving these problems is sat privately and being held for private gain only, given the scale of the public challenge we face, has to be wrong. Just like I was on a panel last night talking about the pandemic, we've made IP open for many, many global diseases and the pandemic has now opened up much of this and these data sets. We have to have the same mentality for climate change, for circular economy, for the SDGs. And I take Isabella's point. I think we've got to get the right governance around it. But science and R&D and teams and so on, we have to have a different relationship between the public and the private sector and across global borders. I liked Isabella's point, north, south, east, west. It's a problem of scale and speed that demands that collaboration.
Isabella?
Sorry, Professor Liu, I really have to go because I have another meeting, but only I think that, first of all, thank you very much, and also my pleasure to meet Peter again, and also to share, to learn with the Professor David and Professor Sheng, and also consider your moderation. It was very interesting, but I'd like only to remember 2 or 3 things politically, okay? We need not only new governance, as Peter mentioned, and also Professor Dave, we need a new mindset to understand political economic what we need to do this century, because pandemic it's only a picture, okay, about what global crisis means. And my feeling, we know a lot, have been learning a lot about climate change the last 40 years or 50 years based on science. And since 92, when they took decision to have a climate regime in the world, the last 30, 35 years, we played based on the politics of beliefs. Okay, it's something that doesn't make sense, because when we understand where we're living, we manage today concrete extreme climate events in our societies. And we had time in the past to try to figure out some innovative governance arrangements. We cannot forget, of course, common responsibility, et cetera, but the problem is for all of us today. All of us, we're exposed to the same global crisis, and COVID shows it to us. So I think that, as I mentioned before, this is global, this is urgent, but okay, we need to understand how the countries will come into this. What will facilitate this? And in my perspective, focus is very important. Climate change, we have one tool, consider Paris Agreement. This is the NDCs, the national contribution. We need to understand how the countries will propose this. We need to understand how circular economy will come into this natural strategy to accelerate solutions or not. Okay, we need to act based on concrete tools that promote, not only bringing people together, but allows dialogue and convergence of interests and issues. We need to have a framework. For example, we need to discuss targets. Okay, what is the economy? How economies will come to address targets? Circular economy, it's important to have metrics and targets and data and information because it's not more based on the politics of beliefs. So it's the same when you go to social inequalities. It will emerge. What is the impact of circular economy to minimize or to address better social inequality in some regions around the world, not necessarily in the same region or the same impact. So my feeling is that you need to also to support, this probably is very important, how circular economy should support developing economies to promote innovation plans. It's technological innovation plans. This is very important because people use not to manage this in the same way, and they used to manage this based on the past and not based on the future. And this is like Peter used to say, Peter, I'm worried about Sustainable Development Goals because I proposed this. Okay, but I'm thinking about Sustainable Development Goals beyond 2030. Okay, I'm looking for how we will prepare a framework to host beyond 2030 a new decade, as Professor David highlighted here. How would you like to come this? How I have to manage this today to have a new framework, a new level to manage the Sustainable Development Goals, because I fully agree with sustainability is sustainability, but so what? Okay, and so what? So my feeling is that you need to try to bring the future to the present, and the circular economy is a powerful asset because it really connects things. But as Professor David highlights, and also Professor Shane, we need to understand the behaviors, the impacts, how people manage it, how people will absorb this as an asset. If not, again, dreams, we have some groups that will promote this, but it's not based on the local needs. And there is no time to another mistake. Okay, unfortunately, we have the last 40 years based on the politics of beliefs, and now we need to be based on politics of action, and how difficult it is. But don't forget, I do believe that you need to go not north and east, north and south, but also the green global south, when I used to say, means that you should come Western and Eastern country together and connect with North country. And this is very innovative. The values that Europeans share based on circular economy, not necessarily the same values that Brazilians will share on circular economy in Amazon region, for example. And if you're not able to protect Amazon region in Brazil, Amazon forest, two consequences: no Paris Agreement and no climate stability. So what would you like to discuss, carbon offset or carbon stability? I prefer to discuss carbon stability, climate stability and carbon stability. This is how in circular economy, it's an asset for this. Yes, it is. So I think that you need to use some new screenplays, if I can use this expression, really use new ways, you need to tell new stories based on the future. We don't need to tell the old stories or old solutions that unfortunately don't have the future, don't have future. So my feeling is that if we're looking forward to address the next 10 years, it's not only climate change. I'd like to address also beyond 2030 agenda, what we need should emerge and what we need to stay behind. This is very important we need to take this decision the next 10 years. Okay, what's in that transition, this transition, not to postpone. Transition is okay. What are the new ways? What is the past? And we need to understand this very well. So I think that Professor Shane, as you mentioned a lot, considering your experience in China, more than this, your vision, I think that my last political comment, the next 3 years, this next year, you have considered the G20 presidents, you have Indonesia, after this, you have India, and after this, you have Brazil. Let me know how you'd like to address circular economy G20. Together with climate change and biodiversity. This is important political floor to make sense, and Peter, to make the difference consider 2030. Okay, it's my pleasure to join you today. To see you again, my friends. Mr. Professor Liu, thank you very much for inviting me. Professor David, very honored, and also Professor Chen, amazing what you share. And I'd like to learn more. Please send me the papers. I'd like to read this and to be informed. Keep me informed, please, Professor Lee. And everything that you need here in Brazil or even international resource panel or on DESA boards, I'm completely available. And thank you very much for the opportunity to bring politics into the real world. We need to change and change together. Thank you very much. Okay, nice to see you again. I'm sorry, but I have to be back to climate debate in New York. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Isabella. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I also need to leave away, Lou. But listen, this was such a privilege. It really was. I really,
My pleasure,
really
my honor. Really, nice to see you again, my friend. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for putting this on
Yeah.
Luohan Academy as well.
Thank you.
Okay,
We'll have
thank
a
you.
final
Thank you.
concluding remark from Professor Chen.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Chen Long. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much. I will learn so much from you. Bye for now.
Okay, we'll see you. Thanks much, Reed.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Bye.